I was saying that I think Quick Drive actually isn't a very good fit in this deck, and it kind of feels like the way the deck was designed was Hello, and welcome to another episode of the As Yet Unnamed podcast. I am Swaku, and with me today is my co-host, John.
Hello.
So we're not starting anymore. We're in the second of a new series of videos looking at the Salubri, Ravnos, and Tamizi 5th edition reconstructed decks. More videos in the series as we go through decks, and links in the description below.
Today we'll be having a look at the Salubri deck. The description from the Black Chantry website is: this deck relies on vigilance and protection. Your vampires use their powers of Auspex to foresee enemy moves and fortitude to make their bodies nigh indestructible in combat. When the time is right, you launch upon your prey using mind-swaying dominate powers to damage your foes.
So basically, Stickman.
That sounds about right.
Yeah, so some stats as usual for our statistically inclined listeners and viewers at home. This deck has 12 crypt cards, 10 unique vampires with an average capacity of 6. I think that's like 3 8 capacity vampires in this deck. Makes it one of the higher capacity reconstructed decks we've got for a while. 77 library cards, about 15% masters, 10% actions, 25% modifiers, and 15% combat, 25 to 30% reactions. So it sounds like a very reasonably defensive deck with a good grip of modifiers. I think the deck is a bit schizophrenic.
Yeah, it could use some focus.
It does have some effects that, look, I get it. If everything lines up exactly at the right time, the deck will work as both a sticks deck and a sort of tap and bleed deck. But there is this problem called real life, and people generally frown upon stacking your deck exactly how you want it. So I think that's kind of where the confused feeling comes into play.
Yeah.
Anyway, let's have a quick look at the new cards, notable reprints, and the new art. Bear with us, there are a lot of new crypt cards with special abilities that are, I think, worth mentioning. So yeah, we're going to go through a fair number of crypt cards. First crypt card is Seraphina, 8 capacity, independent Salubri with inferior celerity, inferior blood sorcery, superior aspect, superior dominate, superior fortitude. Seraphina can add 2 blood or life to a minion you control as a +1 stealth action, not to exceed starting life. So I think her disciplines are good. She would probably shine a little bit more with their other celerity friends or cellmates on my notes. Get it?
Yeah, I like her. There's nothing wrong with whatever she has. She's got good art, good set of disciplines. Celerity goes a long way, so does Thaumaturgy, and that ability can come in clutch from time to time, I'm sure.
Although, do you really think inferior restoration on a stick is worth the 8 pull investment? For me personally, usually if I put 8 pull into a vampire, I'm probably not looking to have her sit around and, do inferior restoration on someone else. Quick Drive, maybe? But I think Quick Drive is not the bee's knees in a deck like this.
Yeah.
This is coming from someone who allegedly goes, woo, every time I play a Quick Drive.
Yeah, I mean, so the baseline is 6 cap for all 3 in clans, and then you're paying 2 extra for celerity, thaumaturgy, and her text, which is not a great bargain, I'll admit. But if you're leaning on that celerity, I think the celerity is the main thing you're going to lean on. You're not going to have many other options outside of her. So I think that's where she fits in her spot. Yeah, you're right. 8 cap for all of that is a little pricey.
All right, moving on. So this is not the card specifically that we're looking at right now. This is not a problem with the card specifically. There is a problem with the Salubri background. It sometimes makes their names nigh impossible to read. Anyway, rant aside, Alonka is the next vampire that I was hoping to highlight. She is a 7 capacity, group 7 independent Salubri, inferior blood sorcery, superior auspex, superior dominate, superior fortitude. And once each turn, if Alonka is ready after a successful bleed against you, she can look at the acting minion's controller's hand, and then she can discard 1 card at random from it. I like this. Looking at your predator's hand is always good because it's information.
Yep.
Especially the way most people play, they won't fire off their biggest bleed on the first action. It usually be, a smaller one to tempt out your deflections, misdirects, bait and switches. And sometimes I think, or actually a fair number of times, I think it would actually be worth taking that 1 bleed to see what the rest of your predator's turn is.
Yeah.
One of the things that's interesting, the ability to discard a card at random from the acting minion's hand, or rather the acting minion's controller's hand, is not tied to the ability to look at it. So you can look at it and then choose not to discard anything from that hand. And unless I'm missing something here, would you agree, John, that you actually almost never want to randomly discard a card from that person's hand?
I mean, I think there are situations where, they've got 3 more acting minions and their hand has a few actions and modifiers in it. At that point, probably try to knock one of them out so they have a less productive turn.
But it is random, though.
It is random, but I'd take my shot at it.
Fair enough, I guess. When it comes up and you actually had a chance to randomly discard and profit from it, let me know. All right, next up, the first time I looked at this vampire, we were looking at it, right, in our local playgroup. And someone glanced at it, and because it's white on white, white text on white background, that someone was like, hey, is that vampire called Anal?
Real mature.
Hey, nobody said VtES play it so much. I don't know what gave you that idea. Anyway, Nell is a 6 capacity, group 7 independent Salubri with inferior fortitude, superior auspex, superior dominate, and Enel can burn a corruption counter or a card requiring a discipline from another minion as a +1 stealth directed action that costs 1 blood. I kind of like this. It's a pretty good removal on the stick for some of the most annoying cards in the game, like Raven Spies, Sensory Deprivation, Disarm.
Sure. Or preternatural strength, even.
Oh, yeah. It's really hard to search builders online for what cards go onto minion and are annoying for me.
Yeah, PDB, get on it.
The other thing I was actually looking at this and I was wondering is the burning of a corruption counter, but I can't really see this coming up, especially not with the tools we get in V5, because it's a pretty bad matchup against Platinum Protocol, for example.
Placing corruption counters is almost incidental, right? So having to spend an action just to undo something that was incidental isn't an effective use of an action.
Yeah. Next up is Sakar. 6 capacity, group 7 independent Salubri, inferior dominate, superior auspex, and superior fortitude. And Sakar can search your library for an equipment card, reveal it, move it to your hand as a +1 stealth action. I like search. Search effects are good. It's also at stealth, which is great. Inferior dominate, not so much. Like we were mentioning earlier, this deck can't decide whether it wants to be sticks or tap and bleed. And Sakar is probably one of those minions which I feel works better as sticks, but then you're also giving him a action to do every turn. I was saying that I think Quick Drive actually isn't a very good fit in this deck, and it kind of feels like the way the deck was designed was, alright, so we want Quick Drive in the deck, and they put Quick Drive in the deck. And now we have Quick Drive in the deck. After a vamp bleeds and plays Quick Drive, what does it do? And someone probably went, oh, what if we stuck a bunch of actions on these vampires and they can effectively use those Quick Drives?
Yeah, I don't even think he goes well into Styx, because Styx, as typical Styx decks, also doesn't run a lot of free drives. They're happy to just sit on that blood and not do anything. And it's not like he can search for Styx either. He's, like you mentioned, only searching for leather jackets and Heart of Nagissus, maybe Ivory Bow.
It's interesting that you mentioned things like Heart of Nagissus and Ivory Bow, and they're cards that your opponent really don't want you to have. And because the card searches to hand, you get this, what I call blocking the rescue kind of effect, where people will let you take the first action and spend that action and whatever associated blood with it, and then block the next action that has to come along.
Exactly that, yeah. I was just saying, between Inferior Dom and that kind of meh card text, I don't think he's that great.
Next up is Dominica. She is a 3 capacity, group 7 independent Salubri with inferior Auspex and inferior Fortitude. Dominica can search your library for a master archetype card, reveal it, move it to your hand as a +1 stealth action. So when I first saw this, I thought she was good. And then I realized what she actually does end up doing is reducing your hand size by 1 for an entire turn cycle.
Yeah, that's unfortunate, and it's true for any kind of MasterCard searching effect. Not that there are a whole lot, but yeah. That said, she is also very flexible. The deck comes with 3 new archetypes, but she's not limited to those. She can also search up any of the older archetypes like Perfectionist, Dabbler, or Curmudgeon, maybe. And at 3 cap, she can even splash into other decks outside of Salubri, so I could see her splashing into Dabbler decks just to fish out Dabblers or something like that. Or Perfectionists in a multi-action kind of deck.
And it's a good point about her being able to hang out easily because she's a 3 cap with, a deck that probably isn't Salubri. And I think in the most recent online tournament, the Atlantic Cup, there was a deck that ran Dominica's, I think it was an Inferno Bali vote deck with Arashad and Zapper, and they used Dominica to specifically fish out Salot's Guiding Light.
Wisdom.
Guiding Wisdom. There we go. 2 additional, no, not 2 additional wisdom. 2 additional votes. And the ability to cancel someone else's vote. And I thought that was pretty smart.
That archetype specifically is great for her as what she's going to do after she's done fetching out your type. So if you're fetching out Dabblers, once she's done, dabbling up your guys, then she just fetches up her own Guiding Wisdom, and then she kind of does her own thing without needing to give her action and action modifiers. She's just kind of comes out and has a game plan all on her own.
She's an oddly dedicated vampire for 3 capacity.
Yeah, the only other guy I can think of in such a role is that Toreador who pumps bleed or minuses bleed.
Andre something.
Yep.
Alright. Next up is one of my favorite Salubri vampires from this release, simply because I love the name and the fact that it low-key trolls some of these combat decks that are running around. So that's Opikun. is a 5 capacity Group 7 independent Salubri with inferior all specs, inferior dominate, superior fortitude, and 1 each combat involving a vampire you control. OP-kun can burn 1 blood to prevent up to 2 non-aggravated damage to that vampire from the opposing minion's strike. And the reason why I say I think it annoys some of these combat decks out there is because a lot of times when you're running a combat deck, you probably have like rolling in the punches or Touch of Valorant or Skin of Steel in the back of your head, in the back of my mind rather. You're probably not paying attention to a 5 cap sitting there with the random ability to just keep the opposing vampire alive by preventing the 2 non-aggravated damage.
Especially, like, I've seen Banu Hakim just kind of struggle to get that last hands blow to knock someone into torpor. This will just add to that frustration.
Speaking of combat, the next group of vampires we're just going to go through as a group is, again, I'm going to be really cringe here and repeat my cellmate jokes. It's the cellmates. The 3 Salubri vampires in this box that has celerity. And I think the main reason why celerity is relevant here is the Anarch cards, Guardian Vigil, and Diversion.
Yeah, and Force March.
Oh yeah, and Force March, of course. I think in this case, especially if you're playing sticks, it's really worth the effort to have a few Anarch converts in there. Very much enough to make your Anarch version of sticks work really well. You can always just throw in Dominica and just for the, what was the card you mentioned? Chromogen?
I think that one's so bad, so it doesn't. Oh, it's not so bad. Yeah, okay, go full on Chromogen. Totally worth it.
Even if Dabbler's a better option, don't worry about it. Just
don't mind playing all, Guardian Vigil at all 3 disciplines. Let's play Chromogen.
And that's basically it for the crypt cards. There are a few other crypt cards in there. We're just not gonna talk too much about it. So moving on to the library cards. There are, again, a significant number of new library cards in this pre-constructed deck. 9, in fact. The first one is, this is an interesting one. Feast of Soul Secrets, or Feast of the Soul Secrets. This is a action card that requires Salubri and Dominate, and it costs 1 blood. The inferior Dominate is a bleed with +2 bleed. It's directed action. And a superior Dominate is as above. And if this bleed is successful, add 2 blood to a younger vampire you control or in your uncontrolled region.
Yeah, one thing that I've seen a couple people overlook about this card is you go as above, blah, 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 younger vampire, blah, 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 uncontrolled region. Okay, it's a govern effect. But it's easy to overlook that you can also choose a younger vampire you control. So that's someone that's in play. So you can use it to top up one of your younger vamps who might have spent some blood or taken damage or something.
If you manage to get a 9 cap Salubri with Superior Dominate, it also works really well with Serena the White.
Yeah, good luck.
Good luck with that, yeah.
Yeah. The main thing about this one is it is kind of greedy, right? You're getting both the glue bleed and the blood. So the drawback is someone has to take the bleed for it to go off, right? Compared to a govern effect where, I need to muster Wake and Intercept to stop it from happening, but it's not damaging my pool, so I can probably let it pass.
Governs having that option of, hey, I'm not actually targeting you, just don't worry about it, right? It's
if your only intercept is animalism, then just don't worry about it because it's not directed or bleed.
Yeah.
Govern gets a lot of free passes in that respect, yeah.
So it doesn't really work very well with a stick deck where you're spending your first few turns, your first 3 or 4 turns just going govern down, govern down, govern down, and then now I have 4 minions and I'm ready to wait for the opportune moment. It is, however, really good in a dedicated tap and bleed or like power bleed kind of deck where you play this and then you know that you now have a bunch of cards that you can deny your praise block and then use it to improve your game plan. So it's really good in a tap and bleed deck.
It is a very powerful effect. The challenge is getting it to stick, and bleeds are one of the harder things to land.
Yeah, it's like people don't like to get bled or something. It's annoying.
Yeah, go figure.
Anyway, talking about block denial and a very delayed segue. Boss Confessional is the next card I'm going to talk about. It is a action modifier that requires Salubri and Dominate. And it says only usable if a minion attempts to block. At Inferior Dominate, the blocking minion gets -1 intercept. And at Superior Dominate, the block attempt fails and the blocking minion cannot attempt to block this action again. It is, I find, one of the main reasons why a tap and bleed Salubri needs Superior Dominate.
So this is basically Call of the Hungry Dead, but better, right?
Yeah, because it's free.
Because it's free. The superior effect is free, and it's within Dominate, so it's not like you're just limited to Salubri anyway. So yeah, I guess that's kind of the same thing.
Clan Impersonation is a card. All good decks apparently start with Clan Impersonation.
You know, don't get me started. But that is an archetype, right? That we've seen, or at least I've seen played. Giovanni, Dominate Bleed with like block denial, things like Seduction and Call of Hungry Dead. And Salubri getting this particular card makes the whole archetype an option to them.
100%. Like you were saying, the fact that it's in Dominate and, you know, Seduction is also in Dominate. One day, maybe we will have a Salubri with just Superior Dominate, and this would just be oddly powerful.
Nothing else.
Nothing else.
Yeah.
Right, next up is the new Salubri Hunting Ground. Meditative Grove. Requires Salubri, obviously. Cost 2 pull, unique location, Hunting Ground. The usual Hunting Ground spill, gain a blood. It can only gain a blood each turn from one Hunting Ground. But it does also have the additional ability of you can lock this card to cancel a Frenzy card as it is displayed on a Salubri you control. And then reminder text cost is still paid.
The other thing is this Hunting Ground can only give blood to Salubri. I believe the standard Hunting Ground isn't restricted that way. Small differences.
Taking this conversation outside of just the pre-constructed deck, I would run this in a deck with Saulot. Being able to cancel the occasional Rostrek is really, really, really good.
Oh, for sure.
Now, if only Archon Investigation was also a Frenzy card.
AI is fine where it is.
And then the next 3 new cards, we'll go through them one at a time, but they're basically the 3 new archetypes. So first up, Saulot's Avenging Fist requires Salubri, cost 2 pull, it's a unique archetype, and it says put this card on a Salubri you control. This Salubri gets +1 strength. This Salubri can enter combat with a non-Salubri vampire as a directed action. If that vampire is Tremere, this is a +1 stealth action, and a vampire can only have 1 archetype. I'm not a big fan of this card, I have to be honest.
Yeah, 2 pool is a little bit steep for this effect. I wouldn't mind paying 1. And yeah, like you said, this particular crypt or archetypes this crypt runs don't particularly want a rush or increased strength doesn't hurt, but you're not going to spend 2 pool for it. It could go into Solot, who has things like Anesthetic Touch, who likes slapping people around.
It has a home, this is just the wrong home for it.
Yeah.
Next up, Salot's Guiding Wisdom. Salubri Master, +1 pull. Unique archetype title. Put this card on an independent Salubri you control to represent a unique independent title worth 2 votes. This Salubri can lock during any referendum to force a vampire to abstain. Once each turn, this Salubri can lock before range is determined to end the combat involving another minion you control. Vampire can only have 1 archetype. I think this is one of the more flexible archetypes among the 3. I mean, to be honest, among all the archetypes.
I mean, frankly, this goes on Dominica and nobody else.
You think so?
I think so. Because she doesn't really have the disciplines to be running around and doing things. She can happily stand around, ready to lock and force vamps to abstain. And that's what I was saying earlier about once she fetches up the archetypes for your other vamps, she fetches this up for herself, and this is her job for the rest of her life.
What? She can be a Chromogen too? What are you talking about?
Sure.
Yeah, you're right. You definitely want this on a smaller vampire, and well, small independent Salubri. It's just Dominica at this point.
And the fact that she searches it up it's made for her.
Alright, the last archetype in the deck, Salwat's Healing Touch. Master requires Salubri, unique archetype. Put this card on a Salubri you control. Rescuing a non-premier vampire from torpor costs this Salubri -2 blood. And if the action is successful, the rescued vampire gains 1 blood. This Salubri can add 1 blood or life to another minion not to exceed starting life as a +1 stealth action, and a vampire can only have 1 archetype. Oh, before we talk about this, let me go back in time a little bit. Salwat's Guiding Wisdom is also only usable on an independent Salubri. So if you're planning to go the Anarch angle, this does not work on an Anarch vampire. Alright, back to Healing Touch. I have seen this used very effectively. It does give you this option if you decide to run Quick Drives, Force March, or whatever it is, that you can rescue one of your vampires that's in torpor, and then Quick Drive, and then now you have 2 minions to bleed with because of the 1 blood.
It's crazy good value, right? So an action that normally costs 2 blood is now free and grants a blood. That is a pretty big swing in efficiency. So you can't knock it. It's just a matter of how often are you really in torpor? Otherwise, what are you doing? Are you daring the dawn consistently? Maybe there might be a deck there where you just regularly dare the dawn and rescue out for +1 blood.
But having said that,
the other thing it's good for is the rescuing embraces, right? So you were talking about earlier where the embrace action itself goes through, but the embraces hunt is what always gets blocked. This makes rescuing embraces very efficient. The only problem is the clan doesn't have that much great tech for, I guess, going wide. They don't have a Pala Grande type effect. At most, you can go Club Illusion, maybe.
not the best deck in the world, but hey. So that's the 3 new archetypes that comes with the deck. Next one up is a new equipment, the Sword of the Archangel. It is a Salubri equipment, cost 2 pull, unique melee weapon, and it has strike, +1 strength, aggravated damage. Once each turn, this Salubri can burn a blood to cancel a grapple or aim card as it is played by the opposing minion and its cost is not paid. Once each turn, if the opposing minion is burned during this weapon's strike resolution and the barrier remains ready, barrier can unlock at the end of combat. I think melee weapons in general struggle to find a place in the game.
Melee weapons that cost pull aren't the greatest.
Yeah, I mean for 2 pull you can get a 44 Magnum.
Yeah.
So I think the biggest problem with this weapon, or in the deck at least, is there is no real way to reliably get it into play. Well, we ended up talking about one of the favorite meme weapons in the game, Kali's Fang, or depending on who you ask, one of the best weapons in the game. And I think my comment was that even though Kali Fang is a little sad looking at this sword, it is easier to get Kali Fang into play because Banu Hakim have got Obfuscate, which allows you to play disguised weapon.
Yeah, this feels like a flavor piece to me. I don't think it fits into any kind of archetype. It doesn't go well into sticks. It doesn't go well into like power bleed. You know, pair that with the fact that it's a unique weapon. That's also something that typically means it can't be relied upon. I'd almost always prefer an ivory bow over this.
You're right. This is too cool for something that you could do better with one. Anyway, next up, Touch of Valorant, a Salubri Fortitude action or combat card that costs 1 blood. There are 3 effects on this card. The first effect is Inferior Fortitude, action, +1 stealth action, add 3 blood or life to a minion, not exceeding starting life. Inferior Fortitude, combat, prevent all damage from the opposing minion strike, or Superior Fortitude is a combat card only usable by a ready vampire not involved in the combat involving another minion you control, prevent all damage to that minion from the opposing minion strike. I kind of like the extra, I guess, inferior, for lack of a better phrase, ability because it means that Touch of Valorant is infinitely more cyclable than, say, a Superior Metal. Because if the table's combat light or like has no combat at all,
or everyone's just playing SCE or something like that, yeah,
you can always just use it to give blood, and you don't even have to give blood to a minion you control. So it does give the Salubri deck some interaction points. You could probably make some deals out of it. And then you mentioned that this is also good for allies.
Yeah, so the superior effect is what's, I guess, the reason you're playing this card, right? It lets you prevent all damage from a strike, and it's playable by a vampire not involved in the combat. That means you can prevent damage on allies. Yeah, so if you're playing allies that you would like to stick around and regularly get into combat, things like Carlton or Model Vampire Hunter, if you're splashing with Malkavian, I suppose. But if you can squeeze in a Touch of Valorant, they get to live another day.
Carlton and Model Vampire Hunter, especially if you can keep it around as long as possible, it is a not insignificant threat. Next up, Unleashing the Bestial Soul. Action modifier requires Salubri and Dominate, cost a blood. It's only usable as the action is announced. At Inferior Dominate, choose a minion. That chosen minion cannot play reaction cards this action. And at Superior Dominate, it says above, and the next reaction card plays this action costs +1 blood or life. So there is a interesting ruling with wake effects that allows people to play wake cards in the S-Plate window of Unleashing the Bestial Soul, which means someone can play a wake in response to Unleashing the Bestial Soul and get around the restriction on reactions and or the extra life or blood.
That does make playing this card a lot more cumbersome though, right? You declare your action, then you have to ask, are there any wakes before I play my as announced cards?
It's actually worse than that. So you can everyone else can actually wait for you to play Unleashing the Bestial Soul and then play their wake before you replace for Unleashing the Bestial Soul and not be affected by it.
So hang on. If you play Unleashing the Bestial Soul, and then they respond with a wake, you can then follow up with a seduction on that vampire they woke?
Yes, you can.
Okay, that's not too bad.
But we are also getting dangerously into Magic the Gathering territory.
We don't want to go there. Now, you mentioned you have run this with Crocodile's Tongue with good effect. I'm not convinced that Crocodile's Tongue is any good at all, so why don't you sell me on it?
All right, so for the listeners or viewers at home, the Crocodile's Tongue says, only usable if an ally or younger vampire attempts to block. The attempt fails and the blocking minion's controller cannot attempt to block this action again. The blocking minion can then immediately burn 1 blood or life to cancel this card as it is played. And then at superior, cancelling the card costs 2 blood or 2 life. So it's not just a simple Elder impersonation. It doesn't cause that minion to fail to block. It makes all that player's minion unable to block this action.
I didn't realize that. Okay.
So I have used Unleashing the Bestial Soul to burn down blood. So for example, if your prey's plan was to attempt to block, expecting a forced confessional or even Daring the Dawn, some kind of block fails effect, and then play a deflection, for example, if you've got Crocodile's Tongue, they need at least 4 blood to make that all work, because they have to pay 2 to cancel Crocodile's Tongue, assuming you have superior auspex, and then pay 2 just to deflect. So if they only have 3 blood, they can cancel Crocodile's Tongue and then not be able to play deflection, or let it through and then play deflection, but the action's not at stealth anyway, so your whoever is being deflected into has a good chance of blocking it. And you still burn 2 blood off your prey, because one of your prey's minion, because that deflection will cost 2 blood.
Sure. I'm convinced.
All right, that is all the new cards that are in this pre-constructed deck. And the last card that we want to talk about is a notable reprint. It is My Enemy's Enemy that was last printed in 2006 in the 3rd edition. And I had a quick look at the pricing online for singles for this card. It used to be, I could be wrong, it used to be about 40 Australian dollars. And if you haven't sold off all your spare 3rd edition or earlier My Enemy's Enemy, they are now about $5 each. So yeah, time to hang on to them. Alright, so that's all the new cards, new art, and notable reprints. Thank you for staying with us all the way to this point. Let's talk a bit about the deck strategy. If you haven't quite figured out, we're basically saying that we've got 2 separate potential strategies here. I think you need to do some tweaking of the cards from the deck to make them really work, but we both think it's either some variation of sticks or some variation of Weapon Bleed or / Power Bleed.
Just like you mentioned right at the beginning of the podcast, there are 2 archetypes here, and out of the box, it tries to do a bit of both. And if the stars align and you draw the exact cards you need, you might be able to do both well. But chances are you're going to get a mix of cards that, ends up doing neither of them very well. So, yeah, it helps to focus the deck and hone in on a particular strategy. One we keep referring to as sticks, or, might be more commonly known as the Ventrue Antitribute Grinder. The fact that the 2 clans have the exact same discipline spread pretty much means they can play the same deck. And the old Ventrue Anti, they didn't really have much clan-specific tech, so most of what makes them special nowadays is basically the card text on their vamps. So it's a close comparison between the 2 clans.
Yeah. Salubri having Touch of Valorant, it's a tool that Owen and friends don't get. Well, to be fair, I'm not 100% sure if that one card is something that would make, Salubri a much better stick or grinder than Ventru NT. And I think you're right. It remains to be seen if Salubri can, in fact, outperform through NT in this area.
Yeah, aside from the vamps, Owen Evans being the main dude, his card text does a lot for, I guess, keeping your vamps healthy and garnering deals around the table. As for library cards, I think the main one the Venture Anti get is just Abbott, and depending on your crypt, you might be able to squeak out an Under Siege.
So the other strategy Salubri strategy that Salubri have is Tap and Bleed. Maybe it should be called Lock and Bleed now. Anyway, lock down your Prey's vampires and then bleed with Dominate. So that one's pretty straightforward. You run Bunker Buster effects like Pentax Aversion, Blind Spots, things like Anarch Troublemaker, which is conveniently in the deck. And then you pair those up with Seduction, Unleashed Bestial Soul, and Forced Confessional. You should typically be able to get your bleeds through 2 vampires, and then if you're lucky, you'll be able to get them through like 4 even sometimes. The benefit of this sort of deck is also because you don't actually have stealth. A lot of times if your bleed gets redirected, it is much easier to be responsible and just let the block happen. You mentioned an Anarch Twist.
You weren't gonna mention your favorite pun.
My favorite pun? Cellmates.
I mean, that's the main thing you're going for with the Anarch Twist, right? You're getting Celerity, which opens up the Individual Dabbler, Diversion, and some neat Anarch Wally things like Constant Revolution, Anarch Free Press, things like that. Since you're leaning more into the Anarch angle and their disciplines rather than the Salubri tech, you could even splash in vamps from Group 6 with a similar discipline spread. Matthew is conveniently Salubri. It's just that he doesn't have Dominate, and Nuriel, which is Salubri Anti, who does have Dominate inferior.
The other option for the deck is to splash a little bit of Spirit Marionette. This mainly arose from a conversation we had maybe months back, where what the card does is it steals one of your prey or whoever it is, unlocked minion, and then bleeds with it. But what it actually does is it encourages players to end their turn with all their vampires locked, or at least all their important vampires locked. And this helps greatly, the threat of it rather, helps a lot with the tap and bleed strategy. It works amazingly well with Unleash the Bestial Soul.
So the neat thing about Superior Marionette is its inferior option is actually Dominate. So it's not like you're gonna get blocked with them in hand. All your vamps should be able to play it. So if you draw too many, just bleed with them. It is an interesting, thought or consideration to think. If you want to supplement your block denial tech with a bit of stealth, maybe you just Spirit Marionette and Bonding.
So, what do you think can add to this deck from the greater world of VtES in order to make it different or potentially better?
Depends what angle you're leaning towards, right? If you're going for the grinder, it is missing some key grinder cards. Smiling Jack in particular, Constant Revolution if you're going with the Anarch, Pentex. Those are the big ones, I think.
Yeah, and then if you're playing Lock and Bleed or Power Bleed, Blind Spot is an extremely good card. The Salubri deck does run older in the V5 meta, so younger or ally isn't really that big a problem. Pentax Aversion, again. And Daring the Dawn is probably something you might want to consider. It is a huge investment to send a vampire into Topo just to get one action through, but sometimes that is your victory point or your game win.
Uh-huh.
Or like John mentioned before, if you really want to lean into it, you can run Daring to Dawn with Lord's Healing Touch.
Maybe.
No? Not convinced.
I mean, it was my idea, but
I think one thing to really note, if you are going to throw in a couple of Group 6 Salubri, is beware of the Scars rule. Remember that you need to bring out that Scars Vampire before your other vampires, or you have to pay the penalty for it.
That would be my preference. Ideally, you would want to bring out the Scarce Vampire first, so I would run 5 or 6 of the Scarce Vampires just to get them in my opening crypt, and then also run a bunch of wider views to actually draw into other vampires I'd want to use.
There is an old card that it's not that great a card, and it's Stranger Among Us. It basically lets you search for a Scarce Vampire and from your crypt and put it into uncontrolled region. Not the best option, but it's an option that you can consider.
The neat part about it is adding to your crypt, so it's not like to add one card to your crypt, you're already spending a pool and 4 transfers, so it's not too expensive, you could say.
Yeah, that's a good point. I think we've pretty much come to the end of the deck review. Thank you, John, for joining us again.
Thanks for having me.
And once again, yeah, we hope you found this helpful. And if you think we've missed anything, or is there something else you'd like to see, let us know in the comments. And until next time, see ya.
Bye-bye.